So you might be wondering, why are we talking so much about drawing cubes? Well, for some objects, the choice is pretty obvious because they pretty much look like cubes at the end. But for a lot of other objects, it's not so obvious. And there's a couple reasons for this. But generally speaking, it's because of the idea of bounding boxes. And what I mean by this is thinking of things in terms of the large, simple rectangle that you could contain any kind of complicated object with. So if I were just doing some simple sketching here to decide what the side view of this futuristic speeder might look like, I've come up with these two different ones, but really this shape is way too complicated to easily bring into perspective. So instead I'd think of them in terms of the bounding box, the much more simple geometric form that would roughly approximate them. And once I have this simplified shape, it's much easier to realize this in perspective. And then once you've got the general guidelines, you would tighten it up and turn it into a finished drawing. But you're going to find the most success in freehand perspective if you can first think simple and then begin to refine. But your bounding box is not always going to be a simple rectangle. So in this video, we're going to talk about ways to do some basic sculpting, in which you'll take a basic rectangle, which by now you know how to draw from any angle, and then cut some pieces off or add some pieces on to give you simple objects, but not just simply rectangles. Sometimes you're going to want to work subtractively. And what this means is you start with an object and then you remove material. Like if this was a big eraser, you'd just be taking a knife and lopping off the corner. Now, as you saw in the example, I was going to start with a triangle shape, sort of the angle that I want to cut my shape with, and then I just project that across. So I'll take each of these intersections and project them in perspective. And see, I got that angle a little bit wrong there, so I'm going to correct and make sure it's parallel in perspective. That's better. Now, once I've done that, I'll take these two new intersections and I will connect them. And really, that's it. Now I just erase away the bit of the triangle that's missing. And I'm done. Sometimes you don't want to remove material, you want to add material. And in this case, you'd be extending an angled surface from the base rectangle. So to begin with this, I'm going to extend this bottom plane a little bit, give myself a little more of a footprint. And then wherever I want to finish that, I'll take this intersection and make a triangle out of it. So this is not going to any perspective point. This is just me deciding how I want that triangle to look. And now I simply need to extend that across the image. So I'll project this back into the vanishing point. You see I messed that one up a little bit, so I'm going to get the angle better. And then I need to extend this intersection back to the vanishing point. And now I need to finish the footprint. And you see I've got all my intersections. So I'll connect the front to the top, and I've got my triangle. And at this point, I could just erase away what I didn't want. And you can also do this by a different method. You can start with the footprint of the area you want to add, and then you can turn it into an angled surface, sort of like a wedge. So here I'm just going to take these intersections here and add my verticals. And of course they're not straight verticals because this is 3-point perspective. And that gave me my two new intersections. So I'm going to connect those down to their corresponding footprint. And there I've got it. So I just erase away what I don't want. Now sometimes you don't want to take an angle off. You actually want to round a corner, where you'd use a curve to define the area that you wanted to trim off of your rectangle. I'm going to start with the starting and ending point, so I could be using a triangle, but instead of the triangle, I'm actually just going to draw in a curve. Okay, so now I'm going to project this straight down the form. And there I messed up a bit, so I'm going to get my perspective correct. All right. And then do the same with the other side. Once again, got to get it correct. Okay. So now I've got those two new intersections, and I'm going to try and match that same curve. And one way you can check is right here at the apex. You can pull down a perspective line and see if that's correct. And I can see that my curve on the bottom messed it just a little bit. So I'm going to redraw it so it hits that apex. Okay, that's pretty good. Now there certainly are ways to be extremely precise, but for freehand perspective, this is good enough. So I'll make sure I erase away what I don't want, which is the corner of this box, as well as those back faces. And I'm probably actually going to get rid of that vertical as well. And there I have a rounded corner. So here if I wanted to cut a door frame or really any other insert into my shape, I'd start with a rectangle, or you could do any other shape you wanted, but I'm going to do sort of a door frame here. But now I want to project that back into the form. So the way I do that is recede back into space along these lines. And then to complete the illusion, I just erase away a little bit of the cube. And I'm going to do one more, just like a sort of deep window, just so you really get the idea here. So I'll start with my rectangle and then project it way back into space along these projection lines. And maybe if that's too deep looking, I would actually cut it off, give it a little vertical, and erase that rest away. So there it's sort of a shallow window frame. And at this point, if you really want some bonus points, why don't you put all the ideas together? So if I wanted to add a roof, how would I do that? Well, I'm going to start with the tallest point of the roof, straight out of the middle of this house. And then I'm just going to make some triangles out of that by connecting it to the edges of the house. And then to project this back into space, I'd just follow the vanishing points. And I'd make another right there. Follow that vertical. And here I have my intersection. So I take this intersection and pull it down to the corners of the house. And with all that correct, I just erase away what I don't need. So there, this is a symmetrical roof. And I added it in the exact same way that I added the angles onto those other cubes. And you could go crazy. You could add in another rectangle, push it back into space a bit, work horizontally, put in a vertical, and there you've got another window. So these basic operations allow you to really begin to sculpt in perspective.